right, and I think with that, we are officially getting started. My name is Christopher Michelson. I'm just the moderator for this panel, but I do want to welcome everybody to the first Ashoka U panel on how athletics can advance change making. And we wondered when we put this together, why is this the first time that athletics is the central focus of an Ashoka U exchange agenda? And I'm just hypothesizing, I'm wondering if it has something to do that our stereotypical impression of athletics is that competition involves winners and losers. And on college campuses, that stereotype sometimes implies that athletics is somehow in competition with academics and even other change-making activities. But I'd like to think of myself as both an academic and an athlete. I'm a professor and change leader at the University of St. Thomas, but I am also a tennis player. And I'm not immune to the stereotypes. So in the heat of competition, I sometimes think of my opponent as my enemy. But when I read a novel called Infinite Jest, which if you've seen it, it's a big hulk of a paperweight set in part in a tennis academy. Like most people, I really didn't understand most of the novel, but this particular sentence spoke to me, or these two sentences. In particular, the idea that the competitor on the net's other side isn't the foe, but rather the partner in the dance. And I think in this session, we'll share experiences and examples of how athletics can advance change making as a partner in the dance. So our agenda today is this brief introduction, and then we're going to spend some time with three panelists who I'll introduce momentarily. And then through the chat function, we will encourage you not only to ask Q&A, but also to provide some thoughts about how you might use what you're learning in this session to actually take action on your campus. And then we'll close with some final thoughts from our panelists. Who are our partners in this dance? They are Phil Eston, the athletic director and vice president at University of St. Thomas, Katie Simmet, assistant director of academic services in the athletic department at Marquette, and Cornell Sneed, assistant athletic director of student athlete enhancement at Tulane. All changemaker campuses, and two of them Division I athletic programs, and if you read the news, a third aspiring to be, and we won't say more about that at this point. Phil, Katie, and Cornell are each going to speak for a few minutes to share some concrete examples from their experience on how athletics can advance change making. And as they speak, I'd like to invite you to reflect on three questions. So jot these down if you've got a piece of paper. Three questions. How at my institution can we work with our athletic department to advance change making? Second, how on my campus can athletics cultivate change making lessons for life and work? And then third, how in my classroom, if you're a teacher, can I use athletics to teach change making? Or if you're a student, how can my teacher use athletics so I can learn more about change making? So please submit any thoughts that you have along with questions now or later using the chat function. And I'd like to thank my colleague Casey Gordon, who's going to be moderating the chat. After the panelists' individual remarks, we'll get to their reactions to your comments and questions. So before I turn it over to Phil Eston, I'm just going to add a couple more bits of his biography. He played baseball at St. Thomas way back when, and also spent some time at Penn State in 2014 to 2018. And his remarks will include a story about his time there. So Phil, I'm going to stop sharing my presentation and give it over to you, and then let me know when you want me to play the video. Thanks.
Great, thanks. You know, there was actually a slide there, Christopher, that was next. If you don't mind, we could going back to the presentation, show that slide. First I'd like to thank Christopher for facilitating this session and for the idea. He approached me about this, I believe it was last fall, and we had a pretty good conversation around how, from an ethics and integrity standpoint, athletics plays a role, or should play a leadership role on campus, given sometimes the profile of intercollegiate athletics on certain college campuses, and how can we actually embrace that responsibility. And so that really was the impetus for starting this conversation. I also want to appreciate the comment that I played way back when, Christopher. That ages me a little bit. Appreciate that. But I did attend St. Thomas, graduated in 1995, and since then embarked on a career in intercollegiate athletics. And one of the things that I think is so important about athletics is that there are positive outcomes that happen as a result of athletics. There are positive student-athlete outcomes. As an example, our student-athletes at St. Thomas, and this has been the case at the other places that I've been, have worked at Ohio State, the University of Minnesota, the University of California, Berkeley, and Penn State prior to coming back to my alma mater, St. Thomas. But for instance, at St. Thomas, our student-athlete ACTs on average are higher than students at large. Student-athlete SATs are higher than student-athletes or than students at large. Our GPA last year was a 3.4 on average. The student at large GPA on average was 3.2. And our graduation rate, the 6-year graduation rate for student athletes at the University of St. Thomas is about 81%. Students at large hover between 75 to 76%. So our students do graduate, student athletes do graduate at a slightly higher clip than students at large. And so I think that's a very positive piece, that we are definitely achieving high outcomes from an academic standpoint, and those metrics are important metrics to continue to follow. I think on the other side of it, there are a lot of positive outcomes in pride and spirit and engagement. I think we've all seen the positive outcomes of those things, whether it's at an athletic event, whether it's through annual fund giving, alumni engagement, whatever it might be, students on campus engaging with one another, alumni with their alma maters. There certainly are positive outcomes as a result of intercollegiate athletics around pride, spirit, and engagement. But I also think and have long felt that we play an important responsibility and role in change making on campuses. And in particular today, what I'd like to talk about is social change. And one of the examples, I'm a visual learner and I like to tell stories and learn through stories. And one of the examples that I'd like to start with here happened at Penn State this last year. So in the 4.5 years that I was at Penn State, I served as the football sport administrator. Of course, and as a result of that, got to know our head football coach, James Franklin, very, very well, and his staff, as well as the student athletes, including Jonathan Sutherland, who you see on the page here. This last fall, Jonathan received just an awful letter, and Jonathan shared that letter on Twitter. And I'm not going to read the whole letter. You can see it there, but in part it reads, watching the Idaho game on TV, we couldn't help but notice your, well, awful hair. Surely there must be mirrors in the locker room. And it goes on eventually to say, you certainly will be playing on Sunday in the future, but we have stopped watching the NFL due to the disgusting tattoos, awful hair, and immature antics in the end zone. This person had the audacity to actually sign the letter. And so, again, Jonathan went to post this on the internet. I've gotten to know Jonathan in the time that I was at Penn State. He is just a fantastically charismatic person, very high engagement from an academic standpoint, engages very highly in community service, cares about giving back to the community. And so this is something that should not be directed at anybody. And this person doesn't know Jonathan at all. And I thought what was equally as remarkable as Jonathan having the courage to respond the way that he did, and the university to embrace Jonathan and respond the way they did, Christopher, if we could go to the video, was the next day, coincidentally, Coach Franklin had his weekly press conference. And in his weekly press conference, he shared, didn't name this person by name, I think did it in a very professional way, but he shared his vision and version of what Penn State football means. And I'll say this before we watch the video. Many of you know that "We Are" is one of the slogans for Penn State, and "We Are" comes from a place of inclusion. It comes from a place of love. it comes from an historic event where social change was definitely prominent on campus at Penn State University. So just a couple minute video here that I think will help set the stage for the conversation today. Thank you.
Open up, with a statement, something that I, was thinking about laying in my bed last night that I put together that I wanted to put out there. The football that I know and love brings people together and embraces differences. Black, white, brown, Catholic, Jewish, or Muslim, rich or poor, rural or urban, Republican or Democrat, long hair, short hair, no hair. They're all in that locker room together. Teams all over this country are the purest form of humanity that we have. We don't judge, we embrace differences. We live, we learn, we grow, we support, and we defend each other. We're a family. Penn State football, Penn State University, and Happy Valley provide the same opportunities to embrace one another 12 Saturdays each fall. PSU football brings people together like very few things on this planet. 110,000 fans from all different backgrounds throughout our region, from all different parts of the state, and they're hugging and high-fiving and singing Sweet Caroline together. This is my football. This is the game that I love, and most importantly, my players that I love and will defend like sons. Ultimately, this is the definition and embodiment of what we is all about. Lastly, Jonathan Sutherland is one of the most respected players in our program. He's the ultimate example of what our program is all about. He's a captain, he's a Dean's List honor student, he's confident, he's articulate, he's intelligent, he's thoughtful, he's caring, and he's committed. He's got two of the most supportive parents, and I would be so blessed if my daughters would marry someone with his character and integrity one day. Now back to Iowa, 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 and Iowa.
I think that's good. So I'll just leave with, that I'm really proud of Coach Franklin for doing what he did. Again, I've gotten to know him, and he takes his role as a leader on campus very seriously. And again, I think that's just a wonderful example of how athletics can lead the conversation and lead in engaging in an environment of social change. Thanks.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you, James Franklin. I'm just gonna quickly share one image from our presentation that some of you might be familiar with. It is the social change wheel from Campus Compact. And social change wheel suggests that there are lots of different ways of engaging in social change. And one of them is what you might call socially responsible daily behavior. And I think among other things, what we just saw from player and coach is the kind of socially responsible daily behavior that one would like to see. But we've got a couple of other panelists who are also going to, I think, touch on different aspects of the social change wheel to suggest that athletics involvement in change making is not one-dimensional, it is many-dimensional. So Katie Simmet from Marquette, you've got the floor now.
Thanks. Yeah, I want to echo what Phil said about, athletics certainly is allowing a stage for positive outcomes for our student athletes. And in my role, I work on the academic side and on the student programming side. So I get a front seat to watch some of the great work that our student athletes are able to do to create positive outcomes for our athletic community as well as our campus and beyond. Marquette University is a Division I institution in, the central United States. They're on a very high platform of athletics and have a big stage, big audience, especially when it comes to basketball. We have about 300 student athletes. And two of the marquee programs that I want to highlight today are, we have a Student Health Allies and Peer Educator program, which they have come to call themselves SHAPE. And what makes this program so great is it was started by a group of students who said, we aren't talking about mental health, and yet our student athletes are facing challenges with mental health each and every day. This added to with the stressors and the time demands of college athletics, career-ending injuries, season-ending injuries that further complicate some of those challenges. And this group of students said, let's just get together and start that conversation. So having a deliberate dialogue and starting to normalize some of the stigmas around mental health. This program has been built off literally $0 of budget. And it simply is a shared conversation and a platform to begin talking about, what does mental health look like? How is it facing their teammates and their friends? What do those struggles look like? And we partnered with a faculty member in the counseling department who said, you know what, I could do a session and teach students about how to be active listeners, how to engage with each other just in a more fruitful way, how to connect student athletes and other students on campus to resources around mental health. So in this, they have now grown to a group of 35 or 40 students that meet pretty regularly just to have these conversations. And two of their action steps, I mentioned the workshop that they do. They decided that oftentimes on our college campus, the beds are lofted. And they said, how hard must it be to be an athlete who sustains an injury and no longer can get into your bed? So simple. And parents are gone, and now you need to unloft your bed. So they said, could we buy a toolbox and you could check out the toolbox and go help your teammate unloft your bed? So simple, but providing just really elementary things to make people feel that they're in a better space. During exam week or midterms, they take piles of Post-it notes and put them all around our academic space with positive words of encouragement and simply presenting more positive energy and support for the student athletes that are constantly saying, you're not alone, you're in this together, we're rooting for you. So what I love about that, again, is just started by students who saw a problem and said, hey, here's a conversation we're not having. And current events have certainly put mental health in a greater spotlight, but they're certainly doing it at the ground level. Another program we have is a Leadership Academy. Leadership Academies are certainly growing in college athletics, but what we've done is say, so often students are put in a role where they're being asked to lead. We say, go be a team captain, go hold your teammates accountable, but we rarely spend time to develop the skills that are needed to do that. How do you have a conversation about conflict? How do you confront a teammate when they've broken team rules or campus rules? So we've said, hey, what are those skills that student athletes really need to learn to be able to be in these leadership roles, and how can we ultimately form better leaders? And so just a quick 6-week program, and again, pretty much no budget, just getting students together and presenting some scenarios and some practices to say, how would you confront someone? What are the words we use, and how do we receive feedback and give feedback in a positive way? In that, we've also really started to address how do we have conversations around inclusion and diversity and create safe spaces, because if we create people on the front lines who are more well-versed in vocabulary, understanding, or how to even hold someone accountable about unacceptable language, we start to create a trickle effect through our entire department. Our goal is that we build leaders both for their sport and for their team right now that can impact our campus, as well as for years beyond in life after sport. This past year, we had an incident, a racial incident on campus that created a bunch of tension, and our student athletes said, you know what, we're gonna take a stand first. And they created a video, ironically, using the "We Are," so that is Marquette's slogan as well, "We Are Marquette." And they said, we are one campus, we stand against any injustices, we promote inclusion, we are one community. And so by promoting that video, they then tagged our student government and our Greek life and said, hey, we are asking you to stand for something too and to recognize this as a challenge. So in that, I saw them, create like a little mini community organizing and start a platform to start some of these conversations and use their stage of being student athletes to create action amongst the larger community. The last program we had was a student this past year said, you know, I noticed after the snow melts, which if you don't know where Marquette is, it's very snowy in our winters. They said, I noticed when the snow melts, our campus doesn't look so good. And we often do a cleanup thing in our city, but we didn't ever do one on our campus. And let's just get a group of student athletes together. And that's one great thing about an athletics community is they can quickly tap all their friends and have access to a group of 300 that will pitch in and help. And they simply just walked around campus with garbage bags and said, how can we clean up our own community? So really seeing action in leadership in action in a real way on our campus has been some ways that we've seen this play out.
Katie, thank you for those examples. And we know all too well in Minnesota what it looks like when the snow starts to melt. And for those of you who were going to travel to the Twin Cities for this exchange before it went virtual, we do have to tell you it snowed last weekend, but we do think spring begins this coming weekend. So, you know, Katie, your stories and examples also touch parts of that social change wheel that we haven't talked about yet. You know, not to oversimplify, but as I was listening to you, thought about informal associations and the mutual aid that they enable, community building and community organizing as features of the work that's being done on your campus. And now we're going to hear from Cornell Sneed from Tulane, who's going to share some additional stories and examples. Cornell?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. So my name is Cornell Sneed, and I'm the Assistant AD for Student Athlete Enhancement at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. And our student athletes are striving to make a huge change, and not only on campus, but in the community, not only in New Orleans, but the United States and worldwide. So our motto, translated from Latin, is loosely not for oneself or one's own. And that's something that we really have our student athletes focus on from day one. So I oversee our Student Athlete Advisory Committee, which is our student athlete leadership group. And one of the biggest tasks that they have tried to tackle over the last 2 or 3 years is mental health. So we've partnered with campus and had mental health festivals. We've brought in guest speakers. We've used our athletics budget and the site's budget to be able to bring speakers to campus to help those whose budgets may not be as hefty as ours, and really try to create a sense of togetherness. And we're in this together, and we understand that at a top 40 institution, there are many stressors that go on. And the student athletes brought this to my attention because unfortunately we've had some suicides on campus as of recently, and we wanted to figure out, the student athletes wanted to figure out, how can we help our student body, because we are one student body at Tulane. And they came up with these great ideas of bringing in speakers and having these festivals and just having these times where we could come together just to depress about the things that are bothering us and just have a fun time all together. Along on that front with mental health, myself and our mental health specialist, we started a sophomore leadership mental health group, and as a requirement for all of our student athletes to attend. If you are a sport who traditionally is on campus during the summer, then you'll do it in the summer. If not, then you'll do it in the fall. And we have 4 sessions where we talk about how you can be a champion for mental health and why a lot of the characteristics that are involved in leadership are the same characteristics that will help you be a champion for mental health, because you may not be suffering from mental health, but you may have individuals on your team or cross sport or someone that you meet on campus to be able to help. And a lot of times students, particularly African-American males in their population, won't go out and seek help. But if you have those tools in your toolbox to be able to help your fellow person, whether it's a student athlete or a non-student athlete, then you can help them and help them get the help that they need, whether you're utilizing the tools that we've given you or on-campus resources, off-campus resources to be able to further help you with that cause. Also with that, big champion of, like I said, for one's own. So we really embrace the New Orleans community and do as much service as we possibly can. This past fall, we were the We ranked 5th in the country as an athletics program, how many service hours we did in the fall. And just recently we saw that our men's and women's basketball, men's and women's tennis, and football finished in the top 10 for service hours completed. Our SAC program, they had a great idea in order to be inclusive for everyone's schedules. For student athletes and even some non-student athletes, we're having these service days on campus where we'll take 1 or 2 nonprofits in the city and we'll really highlight them and see what we can do. So for example, there's a great organization called Grace at the Green Light, and she helps individuals who are suffering from homelessness be able to provide food, water, and resources to be able to help them get on their feet. So our student athletes and non-student athletes got together and they made thousands of sandwiches that we delivered to the church that she hosts her events at. Other things that we've made goodie bags for Christmas. We've done Operation Christmas Child. We just really try to help as many individuals as we can collectively as a unit, whether sometimes it's just our student athletes, but we really try to encourage them to bring a friend that are in their classes. Other things that we've done for Changemaker Lens, we've started some diversity and inclusion efforts. So we look at marginalized populations on campus and really try to help promote them. So for instance, Black History Month, we did a trivia night and we had different types of food. When it's Women's History Month, we do the same and just really concentrate on whatever month that we're, or whatever population that we're highlighting, so they know that we're celebrating them, because sometimes they feel like they can get lost on campus. And even with that, it's grown even more. We've had our student athletes really take ownership of it all, and by themselves, they wanted to start groups on campus to try to help individuals who feel more marginalized on campus. And along with that, the other last points that I wanted to touch on was we have 2 classes on campus, Tailor Your Life and Tailor Your Tulane. Tailor Your Life is a social change-making class where we teach our students how to put things that they care about and social problems into the work that they're going to do to try to help make their career. So I know when I'm a former student athlete at East Tennessee State University, and I wanted to have a career that makes a difference. And someone said, well, why don't you work with student athletes? You can help them graduate. And I thought that was great, because I know there was a problem of a lot of student athletes not graduating, getting their degree and just phasing out. So we try to teach them how they can find that changemaker lens and social issues that they actually care about and tie it into the career that we want to go into. And we really have them focus on the actual social change making rather than focus on the money, because we know a lot of young people focus on the money. And we tell them that if you focus on doing something you love, then the money will absolutely come. And then in a few weeks, we're actually going to roll out Tailor Your Tulane, which is a social change-making class as well, but is geared more toward our freshmen. And we're going to have this for our freshman class coming in the summer and in the fall, and it really helps them with a lot of things that we've talked about, but it gets them in one setting so they can understand that this is our mission to help not only individuals who are donning our colors, but society at large, to really drive home the message that it's important to use your platform as an athlete because of the popularity that you're going to have on campus, and people want to see what you're doing and at all the time, whether it's good, bad, or ugly. So definitely keep a positive outlook of the things that you're doing, and when you do things in the community, people are going to want to join you as well. And in that class, we're going to talk about how it is a responsibility that you have as an athlete to be able to give back to the community and show how well you're doing. And finally, something that we started, but unfortunately, because of everything that's going on in the world, is our study abroad program. So we created a study abroad program that we're going to take all of our student athletes overseas to be able to study. And I think the biggest thing with the Changemaker lens is you're not going to be able to help others if you don't understand them and their outlook. And we know study abroad will help them be more worldly and champion to be able to help others who are not necessarily look like them or act like them, or who are not athletes.
Cornell, thank you for those remarks. This is maybe the second or third time that I've heard about Tailor Your Life. And if you want to learn more about it, I have a sense that your colleague and my friend Julia Lang, who I see on the Zoom, would be happy with you to talk to people about it. Tailor Your Life is a really great program that I've seen presented at Ashoka U before. And I think it's really cool that you are pursuing it with athletes as well as students in the design school. So again, back to the social change wheel, I think there were examples of deliberative dialogue, of social entrepreneurship, among other forms of social change in what you described, Cornell. And again, I hope that for the participants, this is just sort of opening a window into the many ways in which athletics can advance change making. In fact, one thing that I've been thinking about during the pandemic, and this is a pandemic without sports. I have 3 kids who are missing watching sports, participating in sports. All we've got is our backyard. And it makes you think about what is sports, what are sports for. So the rest of our time today is really a conversation. And so I'd like to invite our panelists to think about that first question, which I'm springing upon you. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. How is a campus without sports different? What has it taught you about how sports contribute to a campus community? Before we get to that, I just want to encourage people to submit their thoughts and questions through the chat function. I actually asked 3 questions up front and I typed them into the chat function, things for you to think and talk about. How at my institution can we work with our athletic department to advance change making? How on my campus can athletics cultivate change making lessons for life and work? And how in my classroom can I use athletics to teach and learn about change making? I just want to also remark that we've heard at least 3 kind of athletic mottos today. One is "we are," one is not for oneself, but for one's own. And then St. Thomas's slogan is "all for the common good." And they all have us in common, not me, which I think is pretty powerful. So again, put your comments and questions into the chat, and I'm gonna kick it back to our panelists and ask, how does athletics contribute to the campus community in ways that you've noticed because of the absence of athletics during our current time? Phil, I saw your mute button go off.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Let Katie and Cornell. Looks like we may have lost Katie. I don't know if she's on or getting back on. Obviously, I think one of the obvious things that you lose when athletics is no longer on campus is that activity. And the one of the things that athletics does is it brings people together. I believe that we saw how important sports was as a society when sports started to get canceled. And I think that some of us started to understand how serious this is when the Final Four was canceled, and then the Masters was canceled, and then the Olympics was canceled. And I think that perhaps we'll see how important sports is to all of us once the Olympics are, it's rescheduled next year, but once we can engage in the Olympics again, my sense is that we'll once again see how important that is for the fabric of our community. And I think we all coalesce around shared experiences. We all find ways to come together when we kind of pull in the same direction. And sports allows us to do that. I think Coach Franklin said that in his remarks. Regardless of race and culture and hair or not, they all come together on Saturdays at Penn State to pull for the Nittany Lions, or on Saturdays at St. Thomas to pull for the Tommies, or Marquette or Tulane, or wherever it might be. So I think the absence of that certainly leads to an absence of spirit, and it leads to an absence of togetherness. And it kind of helps us understand how important those things are in our society. One of the things that I've long said, and I'll wrap it up here and pass it on, is that rightly or wrongly, I think we could probably spend another hour or 2 discussing whether or not it's appropriate that athletics has the platform that it does and receives the attention that it does, but it does. And since it does, we're not going to change that on this call. Since it does, why not use it for all of the great things that we could use it for? And so, for instance, at Penn State, they've got 100,000 people that come together 7 Saturdays a year that aren't coming together for anything else on campus. Shame on Penn State if they don't tell some of the great stories that are happening on campus through the lens of intercollegiate athletics and use that platform to tell some of the great things that are happening. And if they can, from time to time, affect change in a positive way. So I think that too is one of the things you lose when athletics and sports are taken away the way that they have been. So I'll stop there and pass it along.
Thanks. I see, Katie, you're back in, and Cornell, you're still here. Do either of you have any thoughts about what has the pandemic taught you with the absence of sports about the value of their presence on campus?
I agree a lot with Phil. It seems to when things are going wrong, you always have sports to rely upon to make it seem like some type of normal. Now that we don't have sports, we're looking for other ways to be able to come together. And I'm just glad that at Tulane, and it seems around the country, they're still utilizing their platforms to be able to encourage and influence others to stay safe and make really good decisions. So I'm also glad to see the creativity that's coming out of sports in order to keep a fan base creative. I know sports really drives you and it tries to make you think outside of the box. And I know we work on a lot of that with our student athletes, but it's really good to see that even from us as administrators that we're thinking outside of the box, how we can continue to tell our stories of our student athletes and really find a way to let the non-athlete population understand that we're here with you. And I think a lot of the professional athletes are seeing that as well, that they're quarantining the house and they're talking to their fans and really showing that, hey, we're in this together, we're with you, let's make it through together so we can get back to doing what you love.
All right. I see one comment has come through in the chat that I think is kind of interesting because it involves, so Clara says, my women's studies professor specializes in sports expertise and frequently brings athletics into the conversation through female athletes and what they do within and outside of athletics. For a long time, I think there was, inequality, gender inequality in the sports world. And I think we're still facing that inequality in society, in pay within and outside of the world of professional sports, and then on campus as well. I'm wondering if any of our panelists can speak specifically to the issue of gender and change making as it relates to athletics.
Well, I can certainly take a shot at that. Well, I would imagine that we have some attendees that could probably speak pretty well to that also, Christopher, if anybody else wants to speak to that. But I would say, I have 3 kids, 2 sons and a daughter. And one of the things that I think sports teaches all of them is perseverance and confidence and kind of that stick-to-itiveness. And when you put your mind to something and you can accomplish, you see yourself accomplish something and you gain confidence in it, and you have successes and are rewarded for successes, and you have failures and have to deal and manage dealing with adversity and loss. I think those are all important lessons. They're important life lessons. And athletics, because of the nudge and the push from Title IX, athletics is one of those places that I do think is becoming far more equal in terms of opportunity. And you're starting to see one of the outcomes is that student athletes do have a higher job placement rate. And we're seeing that in male and female student athletes both. And I think that confidence level is a big piece of that, Christopher, when you think about the ability for women to participate and compete and succeed and fail, and all of the things that come with that lead to really positive outcomes beyond athletics. I also think that when one of the most important things for starting to get closer and closer to equality, particularly compliance with Title IX, is for young women to be able to see their leaders also accomplish things. And so the further we go in this, the more head coaches who are women we have, the more successful and accomplished people in that field we have. And they can see, you know, as I said earlier, storytelling is a really powerful way, I think, to get a point across. I also think that when you see something demonstrated, it helps to tell you that that's something you too can accomplish. So I think those are just some ways maybe that we see that positive change coming through athletics.
Thanks, Phil. Katie, Cornell, any thoughts about gender and change making in athletics?
Go ahead, Cornell.
I would definitely agree. I know, and just thinking about it, and I think about this all the time, just how diverse our senior leadership is. And it's great for our female student athletes and even our male student athletes to see that we have a lot of females in dominant roles in our athletic department, and they're the ones who are making these big time decisions. So it really encourages our female student athletes that they can be them. And I know recently, just working with two of our swim and dive female student athletes, they are looking to become ADs, and they've been inspired because we have our deputy AD as a woman and our senior associate athletic director for academic services as a woman, and they have those unique experiences that they can relate, and both of them were student athletes at high profile schools. So really just having the opportunity to just be able to learn from them, I think has done wonders for our female student athletes, along with the fact that everyone is on an equal playing field. We know that the male sports are most likely the ones bringing in the money. However, in our office, we treat everybody exactly the same, and we want to let them know that no one sport or no one gender is more important than the other. So we really try to really focus on that and making sure that our attendance are well attended at our men's basketball games as well as our women's basketball games, down to our bowlers. You know, we have a women's bowling team that we tell them go out in droves just like you do with the football team.
Katie, what do you think?
Yeah, to piggyback on, what Phil said, one thing in college athletics is we certainly have more metrics, be it Title IX or be it best practices in hiring or whatever it is that certainly pushes the needle in terms of gender equity or inclusion. What I find is that our student athletes and being in an athletics department, there's resources available. So for example, we have an entire organization as Women in Sport to support us and navigating our roles on a big stage that recognizes the challenge of being a female in an industry that, has a lot of male presence. And so we have a lot of support, and therefore in our roles, we think about how do we trickle that down to our student athletes and to our college students so that we can develop young women that are empowered and ready to take on these new challenges. So I think, in college athletics, it's certainly at the forefront of the conversation, and we have resources to support us. And so therefore there is a bit on all of us to kind of pay it forward and pass it down to the next level.
Thank you, and thanks for getting creative about how you are connecting to us, Katie, through your phone. I am looking at another question in the chat from Julia, who asks, what can non-athletes do to engage in change making in the athletic sphere? What do you think, panelists? How would you advise non-athletes to engage with you? And maybe also think about how are you engaging with non-athletes?
I think the best thing is to engage on neutral ground. So we tell the students that I teach and the student athletes that we look after to really go on campus and really find some type of common ground. So I know at Tulane we have several different clubs and organizations. We tell our student athletes to get involved in those organizations, and even our student athlete leadership program is a certificate program, and one of the requirements is you have to join a non-student athlete organization to be able to just embrace things outside of athletics. As I'm sure a lot of individuals know, student athletes see academic services for student athletes as a one-stop shop. They come to us for every single thing you can think about. So we really try to encourage them to get on campus. And if a non-student athlete sees a student athlete, talk to them about something other than sports. Try to gauge their interest. one of the things that I think we do really well at Tulane is we do joint service efforts, and we also work with our student government. They have a liaison to our leadership group, and they come to meetings and they report back to different things that they have going on, and we really have joint things. And like I alluded to before with the mental health, no matter if you're a student athlete or non-student athlete, you can suffer from mental health. So really trying to focus those efforts there and just say, hey, this is not an athlete thing, a non-athlete thing. This is a Tulane University student thing or a worldwide thing.
I'll chime in there, Cornell. I appreciate that. You know, one of the things that I've always thought was really important is making sure that we fully integrate our student athletes into the broader experience on campus. And so you don't necessarily look at a student athlete as a student athlete, but as a student, whether they're in class or engaged in one of the other social clubs or academic clubs on campus. I think that's really, really important. One of the things that I encourage all of our administrators to do is when we see our student athletes around our athletic building or on campus, don't ask them how practice is, or don't first say good luck in the game tonight. Ask them first how class is going. Ask them first how their volunteer experience was this last weekend with one of the things they might be working on, and then get into athletics just to show that we care more about their development and enrichment as a person than we do necessarily their athletic successes. And you know, I'll be quite honest with you. I've never been asked to consider how students at large can better integrate with athletics, or how students at large can be included in some of the social change making that athletics might take responsibility for or think about. And so I think it's a really interesting question to pose. Something, frankly, that I'll bring back to our administration. And quite honestly, you know, Cornell and Katie, as we're thinking about attendance and student attendance in some of our events, if we can actually better pull students at large into some of the things that we do in athletics and resources we provide our student athletes, that may actually help to engage students at large in attendance in some of our athletic events. And so it's a great question. I don't have a great answer to say how students at large can necessarily be included in some of the things that we do in athletics. And so I think it's a challenge for all of us to think through that. I appreciate that question.
Yeah, authentic partnerships are definitely at the root of where I think it started, but it is challenging. And I think of, you know, our student government, most athletic departments have some sort of a student council. It's often referred to as SAC, but that's a really good place where there's a student government on campus and there's a student governing body of athletics, that those two can be partners in tasks. So that's an easy bridge of already established leaders that your campus could certainly tap into. I think about something as simple as our garbage on campus. That was one where we said to all of our fraternities and sororities, like, hey, we're doing this on this day. But I think that relationship that's a little bit more, has a greater exchange from both sides is definitely an area of growth, as Phil mentioned.
You know, Katie, you triggered something for me. One of the things that we've been looking more closely about on our campus is sustainability, and how we can be more environmentally friendly and take a more proactive role in sustainability. And I think that's one of the things that athletics can do. And it's certainly something that students at large and a broader student population and the broader university community can engage further in helping us be better stewards of the environment and our resources. And so that's maybe one example of how we can better engage with the broader campus community in pursuing and advancing social change.
You know, I said at the beginning of this conversation that this was the first conversation of its type at Ashoka U, and so we can't expect you all to have all the answers yet, but I'm really excited about the kinds of questions that you are thinking about and exploring. And there are more comments and questions than we can handle in our time frame in the chat, but I just want to call out a couple. One asks about the emancipation of disability sport, to quote the author. And another brings up the issue of attendance and that sense of athlete, non-athlete community. So just a couple of things for you to think about. But what I'd really like to move us to is some concluding thoughts, which are not concluding thoughts. Again, this is the start of a conversation, but we only have 10 more minutes today to pursue it. So Katie and Cornell first, if the two of you could share some of the thoughts that you want people from this conversation to take away or that you're taking away. And then I'm going to turn it over later to Phil with one concluding story. Katie, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think at the root is togetherness and partnership, and no one solves any of these problems alone. And athletics certainly has a platform that's readily available, and also has access to a number of student athletes that are often eager to be a part of a change. Our student athletes have never been afraid to speak out about an inclusion issue or a diversity issue, or even just leadership or ethics. And so I think that they're ready and willing. And if you have an idea, don't let the fear or the unknown of that partnership that doesn't exist stop you from trying, because it will only, any of these problems will only even begin to be solved if we work together.
Thank you, Katie. How about you, Cornell?
All in all, I think, and something that we really do well at Tulane, is we focus on the individual behind the student athlete moniker, and we really focus on what they're doing athletically and what they're doing in school. But we take it a step further and really focus on them as a person. And they are just like anybody else, and they have very different interests outside of school and their sport. And a lot of them are brilliant. I know I have one gentleman right now who's working on sustainability projects, so very, very impressive, between being a basketball student athlete and being a biomedical engineer major. So really just sitting down and having those conversations and talking with them, and then to go back to the partnerships that you have on campus and see how you can connect the two. And then once you're able to connect the two, then you can use your platform as athletics to really push whatever mission or agenda that you want to have. And I know we've been very successful with that, with our mental health endeavors, and we're very proud that we can really bring and bridge the gap between student athlete and non-student athletes. And to go back to the question that they proposed on how you can connect the two, is at the end of the day, whether you play a sport or not, you're still a student, and you're still going to have the same ups and downs and the same issues. They're just sometimes a little bit different, but they go through the same things and growing pains as 18 to 22-year-olds. So really find that common ground and how you can help both parties and whatever you're doing. And if it's something that in athletics that's helping your student athletes, then share that resource with campus, because they might be struggling to find a resource, or even vice versa. And those partnerships can help you really stop from reinventing the wheel, and then coupling resources together to be able to help more individuals.
Thank you, Cornell. Phil, I know what your closing story is going to be, so, and I'm going to add a little twist, because I got a private question that I was asked to ask anonymously that I think relates to your question. It has to do with the issue of privilege and poverty and performance, to use a third P. You cited some statistics about athletes' achievement outside of athletics. And I think this question relates to whether that's a consequence of excelling in athletics, or if in some way the privilege of, the socioeconomic privilege that sometimes comes with being a great athlete might contribute to those outcomes. So I think the story that you want to share touches on those conditions and outcomes a little bit. So I'll leave it to you to wrap us up.
Sure. Thanks, Christopher. Before I do want to thank both you and Casey. Once again, this certainly wouldn't have gone as smoothly as it has if I had to steer and drive. And so I appreciate you facilitating, and Casey, your assistance as well. Also, Katie and Cornell, I know you guys are really busy. There's a lot going on in our worlds right now. For you to take the time, not just today to engage, but also plan. A lot of planning goes into this. I'm personally appreciative and grateful to both of you for doing that as well. And then those of you that are joining us today on within the panel and the meeting itself, this is something that has to start with a conversation, and hopefully you can bring it back to your campuses and start a conversation on your campus. I think just simply acknowledging that athletics does have a platform. Again, we can discuss the merits of that all we want to, but it does. And so because it does, how can we best use that platform and that megaphone, so to speak, to tell a story, to share important change opportunities on campus, and to share important initiatives that are happening on campus. I think that's our shared responsibility. We all can and should do those things. Christopher, to touch on the question that you posed a little bit, I think one of the really neat things about sport is that you do have student athletes from all walks of life coming together on a particular team. And so even at St. Thomas, we have students that come from different levels of socioeconomic status background, several student athletes who are first generation students on campus, and so certainly are not coming from a privileged background. But we do have some student athletes who have had the means and the wherewithal to put themselves in a position to be successful. And, as I said at the very beginning of the call today, I'm motivated by stories. I think that stories can actually give us kind of a shared sense of start and a shared understanding of something. And the story that I want to share to end the call today is that was shared by Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is a college quarterback. Grew up in Southeast Ohio, Athens, Ohio. Definitely an impoverished community, one whose socioeconomic status is not among the higher statuses in the country. He attended Ohio State, transferred to LSU, and won the Heisman Trophy as a result of his play at LSU this last year. Arguably, should be the #1 draft pick in the NFL draft this year. And as he was receiving the Heisman Trophy award this year, in his acceptance speech, he used that platform to talk a little bit about his community that he grew up in, and the fact that there are so many in his community that do have challenges and that struggle a little bit. And his speech affected change. And so, Christopher, if you don't mind playing that video. It's about a 4-minute video, so bear with it if you don't mind as we go through this. I think it tells a really powerful story. Thank you.
Coming from Southeast Ohio, it's a very impoverished area. The poverty rate is almost 2 times the national average. And I'm up here for all those kids in Athens County that, go home to not a lot of food on the table. You guys can be up here too. I didn't write it. Just went up there and started talking.
Joe Burrow inspired the masses with his passionate and exceptional play this season.
Burrow throws wide open, touchdown!
But the LSU quarterback ignited a movement with his Heisman Trophy acceptance speech, calling attention to the poverty in his hometown.
I wanted to mention Southeast Ohio because so many people had helped me from that area, and then it just kind of came to my mind. I think it would be awesome to mention the struggles that area goes through.
Burrow spent 18 of his 23 years in Athens County, his father a football coach at nearby Ohio University. The night of the ceremony, the people in that community were paying attention, including 25-year-old Will Drabeld.
The speech comes on and I'm listening and other people are talking, and then he said, coming from Southeast Ohio, I felt like I got hit by a bolt of lightning.
There's so many people there that don't have a lot.
That prompted me to post this fundraiser on Facebook. I put up the quote from his speech. I said, let's honor Joey's words and give money to the food pantry. I didn't even think this would raise $1,000. And it just took off.
Donations to the Athens County Food Pantry poured in from all over the country. At one point, Will's post was the top fundraiser on Facebook.
The idea that somebody on that stage cared enough to remember where he came from and these kids, how could you not get a little teary over that?
The Athens County Food Pantry serves about 400 families a month with an annual budget of roughly $80,000. In the last few weeks, various fundraisers, including Will's, have raised more than $500,000.
Joe has given a voice to this region and to its needs that no one has done in decades, perhaps ever.
Everyone kind of has a responsibility to do good, and I'm starting to have this big platform and starting to realize the impact that I can have.
I hope that this conversation will turn into something that will help us actually go out of business. That would be our goal, that nobody is going to bed hungry.
We could actually start to fix major problems that have plagued this area forever. And Joey Burrows made sure that this part of Ohio will not be ignored anymore.
So again, I'll just wrap up by saying I think it's a fantastic example of a young person who understood that he had a platform and had an opportunity to share something that was really important to him. I give him a lot of credit for having the wherewithal to do that. I don't know that all of us would have had that at the age of 22 or 23. And so again, I think an example as we depart our conversation today about how athletics can play a role on campuses and change making.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Cornell. And thanks to everybody for joining. And let's let this be the first of many conversations and actions like this. Take care, everybody.